Okay, so in a society, like maybe the earlier societies, the hunter-gatherer societies, or maybe even when they transition to agricultural communities, people were more or less equal and they did more or less the same things. And because of that, there were a lot of free riders in those systems when people were more or less equal because it did not, or still it does not matter how much effort they put into a particular work endeavor or enterprise. And like your textbooks, like how the book puts it, if the pie is split equally without regard to effort, they are meant to be free riders. People are not motivated, and many people wants to be free riders in systems like this. So, but sometimes when a society is highly unequal, people are also not motivated to work. They figure, why work hard? After all, my paycheck can never increase. The system is too unfair to me or to people like me. So it can go either way. People are not motivated when the system is equal, entirely or close to equal, and people may not be motivated to work. When the system is highly unequal, and this can kill innovation and other kinds of inventions and discovery. And I'm on to something when I ask you question one. If you Google the racial composition of all these countries, just Google the racial composition of Iceland, Belgium, South Korea, and Denmark. Compare the racial composition of these four countries to the racial composition of the United States. And go figure, which country has more diversity? And maybe this partly explain why some of these countries, like Iceland, Belgium, and Denmark, they are essentially a social democratic system. They are a socialist country, but the socialist government was elected into office. They did not come to power through revolutions. They are different from China, Vietnam, South Korea, and many other communist countries. And they are more homogeneous. People are basically similar in terms of social statuses, educational attainment, and other characteristics. If you Google the demographics and racial composition of these countries, this partly explain why these countries are low in economic inequality and the social mobility for the people living in these countries are also about the same. I think it can only work in countries that are more or less homogeneous. In my humble opinion, you don't need to agree. People were essentially born in those countries and they died in the same country. The natives hardly left. And these countries have a more restrictive immigration policies than the US, which explains why the US is more diverse. And because of that, they can be more or less economically equal. People have about the same social mobility in systems like that. And they have a social safety net in those countries, and the welfare system works in those countries because they tend to be more homogeneous than the US. And this also partly explains why, in my humble opinion, a nationalized healthcare system does not work in the US. And I'm not the only person with this mindset. Many other medical professionals, other scientists, other social scientists, other behavioral scientists, other researchers, other professionals also share my opinion because the US is more diverse. Some people, they, including myself, we all migrated to the US. And when we migrated, we brought whatever pre-existing health conditions and other problems we already have from our countries of origin to the US. And because of that, a nationalized healthcare system can be a contesting ground between different segments of the US population, in my humble opinion. And this can be part of the reason why the US has yet implemented a nationalized healthcare system, unlike these countries that shows up in your textbook. South Korea is also quite homogeneous. Taiwan is not listed in here, but Taiwan has a nationalized healthcare system. And in the case of Taiwan, even non-nationals, non-citizens can also qualify for free or subsidized care if they have a job, a legal job in Taiwan. They are covered by their employers, and they can also get healthcare for virtually free or highly subsidized. I think it has something to do with how diverse a country is and whether they are able to provide utilities at a highly subsidized rates for everyone. Or if a public-private partnership works better in some countries, or utilities and healthcare should be privatized in other countries. I think diversity plays a role, in my humble opinion. And your textbooks went on to mention that Denmark is the most equal country in the world. You can Google the income distribution of Denmark if you want. And they conducted surveys. They collected a sample from American adults. And they asked these adults. It did not say whether they were 18 and above or 21 and above. They asked these adults in America how much percentage of wealth were being owned by these different income groups. Or in the survey, let me put it differently. They asked the respondents how much they think people from different income group, they divided the income into 5 categories, and they asked the survey respondents how much people in each income category should own wealth in the country. This is their response. People from the top 20 income category should own about slightly over 30% of the country's wealth. And people from the next highest income category should own about 20% of the country's wealth. They also think that those from the lowest income group should own about 10% of the country's wealth. But according to actual data collected by the US government, those from the highest income group own about 85% of the wealth in the US. So we can say that the US is highly unequal. And those from the lowest income group and those from the second lowest income group did not own any wealth in the US. And those in the middle income group own less than 5% of the wealth in the US. So this is how much people think that those from different income categories, how much wealth should they own in the US? But this is the actual results. So from this graph, we see that economic inequality is pretty high in the US. And I think the middle bar is the difference between the two bars. It did not clearly state in the chapter. So I could be wrong. Okay. I asked you this question before. How poor is too poor? And we briefly talked about COVID. And we also compare the poor people in the US with the poor people in an underdeveloped country in a YouTube video. So we are going to skip this. And we discussed the Protestant work ethic. So we are going to skip this. And these are the poor people in the US in 2018. As you can see from this pie chart, the majority of the poor folks are children. I think the size of the pie chart for kids is a bit bigger than the slice of pie for the working poor. So it makes some sense. Children, they are minors and they cannot advocate for themselves. And sometimes things can be beyond their control. Their socio-economic well-being, to some degree, is tied to the socio-economic well-being of their parents or guardians. And because of that, it's hard for them to experience any upward social mobility. So I buy into these statistics. I don't know about you. And from what we just saw, from this survey, so the working poor, those from the two lowest income group, we can classify them, we can consider them the working poor. They are also the poor folks in the US. They don't own any wealth in the country. Maybe they rent and the apartment they rented are dilapidated or poor condition, and they don't own their vehicles. Maybe they finance their vehicles. They don't own anything, essentially. And seniors, make sense. People experience a decline in income after they retire. Yeah, when they no longer have their incomes from their employers, and now they rely on pensions or social security or whatever they have in their retirement accounts. Most seniors experience a decline in income after retirement, according to statistics. Don't believe me, ask Dr. Google. And disabled are also the poor folks, not only in the US, but in other countries as well. And students are also the poor people, some of the students, not all, in the US and in other countries, because they are not generating any income. Even if students have scholarships that pays a small living allowance in case of grad students, those stipends are only sufficient for one person, and rent takes up half of those stipends. I was a grad student, I know. And they have other expenses as well. And because of that, many of the students, if they have a family, when they are still in school, all their expenses of having the baby are being paid by Medicaid. We call them the Medicaid babies. And caregivers, it makes sense. Many of the caregivers are unpaid, or they are considered informal employees. Maybe their jobs do not come with proper benefits. And early retirees make sense. They experience a decline in income. Okay. If you look at these bar charts, the different bar charts in here. So again, they divided income by 5 categories. Q1 is the lowest income group. Q5 is the highest income group. As you can see from these bar charts, 36% of those belonging to the lowest income group, they stay there when they reach age 40. They did not experience upward social mobility. Only 10% of those from the lowest income group, they move up to the highest income group by age 40. About 13% of those from the lowest income group, they move to the second highest income group by age 40. So this bar chart, the leftmost bar chart, tells us that upward social mobility can be challenging, especially for poor folks. And if we look at the rightmost bar chart, 30% of those from the highest income group remain in the highest income group when they hit age 40. They maintain their privilege, social class, and social status. Only about 11% of those from the highest income group, they experience a downward mobility to the lowest income class. So it's quite easy also for the privileged people to maintain any advantages they have with their social class. And those from the highest income group, about 26% of them experience a downward social mobility. They move down to the next highest income group. So when we look at these all 5 bar charts, we see that people pretty much maintain their income categories. Upward social mobility can be quite challenging for people of the lower income groups. So we can say that the US is a highly unequal society economically. So I asked you this question before. I took it from here. And we've been through this before. Maybe in a more homogeneous society, like the Scandinavian countries, maybe some East Asian countries like Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, maybe this is possible. It's possible to have low economic inequality, to have social mobility for almost everyone who is willing to work hard, and to have a pretty decent welfare and social safety net. If people are more or less the same. But this can be very challenging with countries with high diversity like the US, in my humble opinion. You don't have to agree with me. Because many policies are going to be contesting grounds among policymakers coming from different backgrounds themselves and among different segments of the population, especially if the country is highly diverse, the country is also capitalistic, and the country has democracy, free speech. People are going to have different opinions pertaining to different governmental proposals and policies. So it can be challenging for highly diverse countries. My 2 cents. Okay. Okay. So socialism and capitalism, are they different or are they the same? Are they different or are they 2 sides of the same coin? Go figure. And we see that many socialistic countries, they increasingly adopt a capitalistic market economy like China, Vietnam, and maybe Cambodia, or some of the Eastern European countries. Maybe they experience the perils of socialism or communism, and maybe they think that the grass is greener on the other side. Capitalistic societies are better. And I don't know if you encounter people from socialistic countries or communistic countries. Sometimes they are more right-minded. They are not leftists at all. If you talk to them, if you try to understand them, they are more right-minded or right-wing. And I took your second question from here. And yeah, maybe for the same reasons. in my humble opinion, in countries that are more homogeneous. So if everything is subsidized by the government, people may more or less have similar opinions. And if they were born in that country and they go through old age or they die in the same country, everybody are going to have the same pre-existing condition from the same country. And maybe because of that, highly subsidized utilities and healthcare are going to be less of a contesting grounds in these countries. In my humble opinion, you don't need to agree.